Hey neighbor, nothing feels worse than a massive drop in quality between albums, am I right? On this episode of 7 on Sunday, I set out to find a collection of disappointing follow-ups to fantastic albums. It doesn't happen all that often, and it doesn't inherently make them awful, although some are. It's just usually more of a steady decline over time, instead of a super noticeable drop album to album. I did another version of this video a few years ago, so tap the card on screen or in the description if you want to see who was featured the first time. For now, let's spit into the wind by exploring some giant fluctuations in quality that generated a fair share of blowback. Smash that like button, subscribe if you're new, and let's get to it. In 2014, Linkin Park were rock gods hell-bent on bringing tenacity back to guitar-driven music. By 2017, they'd gone polar opposite with a very confusing album that had almost nothing in common with its predecessor, or really the entire LP catalog. The Hunting Party is a very special album for me, and it's hard not to love how hard it goes. The head-tilting banger Guilty All the Same kicks ass and takes names, all while being one of their longest songs ever recorded, setting the stage for punkier cuts like War and anthemic moments like Final Masquerade. In a different world entirely, way down south on the quality chute, Linkin Park turned in an absolute mess of a record, One More Light. It really sucks that this was Chester Bennington's final album with Linkin Park before his untimely death just months after the album's release. I say that because clearly this is not up to par, it's easily their worst record, but also because Chester seemed distracted with other projects like the Grey Days reunion during this process, and the band were working with so many collaborators that I can't help but wonder what this album would have been if it didn't feel so forced and rushed. Even when the poppier elements worked to benefit the song, like in the case of the vibable Confession Halfway Right, or the simple acoustic reminder Sharp Edges, those are standalone moments of clarity, not permanent fixes for a shoddily constructed project that quivers in comparison to the rocking royalty the Hunting Party delivered in spades. The robot overlords handed down the commandments of dance on one of the best electronic albums ever made, Discovery. But instead of the 10 commandments you'd likely see on display at a courthouse in Kentucky, they upped it to 14. 14 songs that maneuver from acid house to disco to pop without even breaking a sweat. Daft Punk already toppled the regime they'd built by assembling Discovery in the first place. They weren't supposed to top Homework. That was a one-album wonder for dance and electronic music, except it wasn't, and the only way forward for the French duo was to consistently step outside of their comfort zone. Human After All came 4 years later in 2005, chasing the pot of gold at the other end of the rainbow, only to come out looking malnourished on the dance rock execution. It's definitely not anything unlistenable, and maybe it's actually underrated in a weird way, but it's without a doubt several notches below Discovery, thanks to an amalgamation of inconsistent production, warping repetition, and a noticeable lack of atmosphere that makes their glass feel half empty instead of half full. Even the singles Robot Rock or Technologic border on asinine the longer you listen, and to put it bluntly, Discovery runs laps around LP3 thanks to an extreme creative edge and a longer recording process that Human After All realistically would have seriously benefited from. Going back to MELOPHOBIA made me realize just how killer this record is, top to bottom, with the exception of maybe Black Widow, cause did we really need that one? Cage the Elephant entered the world of alternative titans by the time MELOPHOBIA dropped, as the album spawned multiple #1 singles at rock radio for the third album in a row. With the ferocious unpredictability of Teeth and the clever retro catchiness of bops like Spiderhead serving as the wind in their sails, it felt like nothing could stop them, and that maybe, just maybe, we were entering the band's golden hour. Tell Me I'm Pretty proved me wrong, not because it's the world's most unforgivable album, it's more like the band were riding a bicycle and someone stuck a metal pipe in the spokes, causing them to lose control and smash into a tree. Dan Auerbach of the Black Keys fame produced this LP, opting to pivot Cage towards a bluesy rock sound more akin to his own band. The intelligent songwriting we just heard consistently throughout MELOPHOBIA got reduced like a fraction as they siphoned off garage rock fumes for a way less potent musical high. The sloppiness looms heavily around the lead single Mess Around, since I don't even think I need to tell you what band that track is cloning, but it's not just that one, it's the fumbling sweetie little Gene lost in a 60s time machine, or that's right, in all of its background noise glory. In 2016, Radiohead won me over with The Moon-Shaped Pool, and I became a fan. First comes OK Computer, then comes The Bends, then comes John from ARTV falling in love with In Rainbows in the vinyl carriage. In all seriousness, In Rainbows is as majestic as they come, including Disc 2 and the iconic From the Basement live performance. Poetic musings roll off of Tom York's tongue as naturally as a river flows to the ocean, and I'll forever count this as a transformative record in my life. There's an artistic nuance allowing every single member of the band to shine. From the bare-bones guitars that take simple chords and arrange them in such a way that you feel moved to your core, to the light drum hits that propel Tom's voice to the surface like letting go of a ballast. When it came time for the King of Limbs 4 years later, fans were obviously keen to see how the holy grail of experimental rock groups would innovate next, but for the first time ever in album form since their inception, they fumbled a bit on the follow-up. Not to the point where I'd call this anything close to a train wreck, just a slightly misguided effort that doesn't fully take you there. I find it odd that The King feels rushed, because average is not a word that I would typically associate with Radiohead, but this album proves that they aren't superhuman, they're flawed people just like you and I, with those imperfections working slightly against them instead of in their favor. Listen, don't take my criticisms too harshly, because I absolutely love certain corners of the record. Bloom is instantly infectious as an album opener, Lotus Flower enchants as Tom stays in his higher vocal while clicking drums and ominous synths mute all distractions. And honestly, I'm pretty fond of the album closer's Separator too. Realistically, if it were most bands turning in the King of Limbs, you'd probably be taken back by the artistic value in the body of work. Unfortunately, Radiohead, being the geniuses they are, set the bar so damn high with their entire discography that a subpar outing stands out like a penguin in a Suspect lineup. Not too many fans would single out Light Grenades as classic Incubus. It's uneven, a few tracks too long, yada yada, but most of it does work. It's generally enjoyed for what it is, and the singles continue to hit hard. Light Grenades fluctuates in intensity, clocking the listener square in the jaw with its protest-fueled mentality, for example, A Kiss to Send Us Off and Rogues, or perhaps it made fans dig a little deeper when the album turns to headier cuts such as the Earth to Bella duology. Following the release of that album in 2006, Incubus took some time off to reflect and re-energize, only to return from a 5-year gap between albums with the ridiculously boring, flat-out what the fuck, if not now, when? I strongly dislike, borderline loathe almost everything here. It's the opposite of inspiring, as it was so painfully obvious as to what Brandon Boyd and the gang were trying to accomplish, but they absolutely didn't. They flop around like a fish out of water gasping for air, but no one's kind enough to put them out of their misery. Much of the album is spent running in circles, and the irony is not lost on me. Thieves and several others missed the mark entirely by coming across as preachy, while even the one song that remembered its battery pack Switchblade feels far from stellar, and more than anything, it's completely out of place on an album that refuses to move faster than a snail. What's even more infuriating is that Adolescence is legitimately good. I was caught off guard by it because it's thoughtful and atmospheric, ultimately rewarding the listener for hanging in there before the slow burn payoff finally kicks in. However, in the context of the album, it is a long journey to get there, since it's track 10 of 11, so save yourself the 50-minute nap and let the single live in a world of its own. Far be it from me to call a brief inquiry into online relationships the gold standard for albums, even for the 1975. They got tangled in some nasty little hang-ups that time around, but those pitfalls never felt like they ruined the album experience, even if it was stuck chasing the tail of the far superior I Like It When You Sleep. But y'all already know why the hammer's coming down. Notes on a Conditional form stinks. I can almost smell it vibing in the corner of a Barnes & Noble Starbucks all the way from the UK. Notes was announced 2 years before it saw the light of day, and you want to know why that was? Matty Healy was talking straight from his ass when he said, 22 songs, here's the title, here's a release date, because God knows the best way to promote an album that doesn't even exist yet is to keep making promises that you can't keep. Online relationships might have soured a bit in the years since its release due to the obvious filler and some of the misguided attempts at making a grand technological observation, but Notes on a Conditional form is shoved so far up its own butthole, you'd need an internal light switch installed to find your way out of this pretentious shit parade. The 1975 makes zero sense with an album that feels like a side project at best And at worst, they sound like a washed-up indie band that lost all control, so why not try and fail miserably at every hipster genre under the sun? It's almost awkward to listen to bangers like If You're Too Shy and People in the Flow of the Track List, because they sound like the 1975 The Band, not the 1975 The Postmodern Art Exhibit. You ever have that first listen to an album that just has you all in the feels, on the verge of tears, and then the same artist puts out their next album and you're on the verge of tears again, but this time it's because the album's so bad and so not even close to touching the hand of God herself? Who else but Lorde? And God bless her, she's talented as hell. It's nothing personal, and I actually understand why she's so reclusive, but in the same breath, I mean, come on! What in the actual fuck happened to the artistry on display, not just on Melodrama, but on her wise beyond its years debut, Pure Heroine? I never like to come across as totally close-minded, and as a massive Lorde fan, you know I was dying to love Solar Power. But after feeling such an intense, visceral connection to her music for years, her third album left me feeling like a hospital patient waiting to get my heart and soul removed. Melodrama flourished because Ella O'Connor tapped into her inner monologue in one of the most perfect ways I've ever seen an artist display. She wasn't afraid to be straightforward or to tuck her feelings into a metaphor as she wrote out these spiritual energy waves backed by her collaborator Jack Antonoff's mesmerizing musicality. Solar Power ain't got any of that, and that's a problem. As in a sinkhole the size of New Zealand kind of problem. Recycling groan-worthy tropical drum rhythms isn't exciting. Neither is 40 minutes worth of lame acoustic guitars at a sea of all too familiar chord progressions. The vocals almost sound like Lorde didn't even want to be there in the vocal booth. It's all very cold and distant much of the runtime, which is the opposite of what we should be feeling on an album titled Solar Power. You could throw a dart at Melodrama's track list blindfolded, and no matter what you hit, we could have a discussion about the intricacies of that song. But with Solar Power, I couldn't play that game, because it's genuinely the most disappointing album I've ever experienced. And her odd attempts at humor and satire and trying to be a little bit more sultry are cloudy with a chance of snooze balls. Snooze balls. What are some more examples of massive quality drops between albums? Take to the comments, battle it out amongst yourselves, and also hit that like button while you're down there. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, then check out part 1 right here, or another episode of SOS over here. Follow my socials that you see on screen, and I'll be back soon for more on ARTV.